Hello, this is a video that contains the gist of a lecture given by the Russian researcher Andrey Sklyarov on the subject of who actually gave the knowledge of bronze work, bronze metallurgy, to humans. This is not a translation by any means, it only contains the highlights of the original lecture, and a link to the original, which is in Russian, will be provided in the description of this video. The official version of the history of metallurgy, the way it is presented to young students in school, is as follows. First, the humans used stone tools. After that, they gradually started using metals in their pure form, for example, pure copper, pure gold, or pure silver, things like that. And then gradually they started using bronze, and by bronze they usually say this is a mixture of copper and lead. And although this is being taught as the history of metallurgy as a whole, I mean the world history of metallurgy, in reality it is only in North America where the archaeological findings actually confirm such development of history. Over there, unlike the other parts of the world, indeed the copper the work with pure copper as such existed. It is the only place in the world where it really did. And by the way, such a news continued even up to the arrival of the Europeans on the continent. On this screen you can see the locations in North America where naturally on the surfaces of the earth, without any digging, were those pieces of copper available. Very easily people could find them, and then they would make tools or objects out of them by hitting them with stone. But because the nature of pure copper is like this, that it would crack easily if you do that. If you hit it in such a way, they would put it on fire, in the fire a little bit, so that it gets a bit softer. They would continue hitting, then put it again in the fire, and so on, until they received the desired result. And in reality, this is the only archaeological fact that supports the existence of working with pure copper in history. So what happened nowadays is while teaching this theory in schools, the science actually got the idea, well, why don't we actually check what are the artifacts that could be supporting this theory that we are having. So let's see what kind of artifacts could we expect when we talk about ancient metallurgy. First of all, those would be the actual metal objects. Well, that is good, however, they cannot always tell us when was exactly the metal mined and how exactly was it processed. Moreover, the metal items were recycled throughout history, and it is usually impossible to find out when and where the original metal was mined, or part of it that made the particular given item. The second historic artifact could be considered the ancient mines. Yes, they can give us some clues, however, that could be very tricky sometimes as well, because they didn't stay idle after the ancients used them for some time. They would sometimes just get buried With time, or most often, they would be reused again in more recent times, and that would make it impossible to find out when the original mining started at a particular site. The next type of archaeological findings that could be very useful and are actually most useful are the waste dumps that were left after mining and metallurgy casting work. Those can tell us more about the actual ores that were being used, looking at the waste that was left after the processing, and also when sometimes there were unsuccessful experiments, the leftovers would be able to give us clues what went wrong, how much did they know, how much they did not know at that time. And the last type of artifact would be the actual ovens or fireplaces where the metal was melted and casted. Sorry, where the metal got melted and later on processed and cast into various forms. Unfortunately, we cannot find much useful information in that field as well, because first of all, they were not, there aren't many of them. Those were not some permanent structures, they were rather temporary. And also in the past they were not much different from other furnaces or fireplaces used for other purposes by the ancient people. It really seems like that even in most cases the furnaces were just for one-time use. So these were the 4 types of archaeological artifacts that the historians could get, but due to the reasons I already mentioned, when they thought about it, they understood the truth that based on these archaeological findings, one cannot make any logical conclusions. And since neither the historians nor the archaeologists know much about metallurgy, they did something very smart. They actually sought the help of specialists in metallurgy. And finally, in 20th century, for the first time, experiments were made, very practical experiments by metallurgy specialists to try out how did it all work after all, this history of metallurgy that is being taught in schools. On the screen, you can see now one of the furnaces built by the scientist Grigoriev in the region of Ural. He was surprised because everything was supposed to work well, the way it is described in the history books. However, when it was tried in reality, it did not work. The way we were being taught is like this. They were primitive people, and they were running ignorantly on the face of Earth for many years, and one day they discovered fire, how they can use it. And after that, as they were throwing all kinds of things in the fire to make further experiments, they found out that some stones, they melt and metal comes out of them. Well, it makes sense. However, when it was tried in reality, it did not work at all. The problem is, for example, with the copper, the supposedly first metal that they mastered, to melt copper in such a way, you need a minimum 1083 degrees Celsius. And to reach such a temperature in an ordinary fire or furnace is absolutely impossible. It never reaches that level. They really did their best. They tried all kinds of tricks to somehow make it melt in the fire, but it simply never happened. The closest they could get, or the most similar thing they could reach, was indeed oxide of the copper, but not copper. They even tried to make it easier for the copper to melt, and they put pure ore, not just stones with ore. They even tried with pure ore putting it in the fire, but no, it would just never come out as copper. At the best, it could be copper oxide, but never the copper. Finally, things only started working when they put the ore in a pot and then mixed inside wooden charcoal and covered it well, and then they put it in the furnace. In the other hand, in other words, um, there was no way to do it experimentally by throwing things in the fire. One needed the recipe already of a complete metallurgy process. I mean, some sort of already complete installation and prescribed exact ingredients. And when everything was done already according to these uh, exact instructions, then it all started working miraculously well. These experiments proved that to get metal out of the rocks, one would need to install a metallurgy furnace. One could not reach to those conclusions just by randomly throwing things in the fire. On the screen now you see a simple sketch of a typical ancient metallurgy furnace. The four objects inside, and these would be clay pots, some sort of clay vessels. Some historians say that actually clay pottery developed just because of metallurgy, but this is still just a questionable idea. It is not proven yet. Anyway, so you see the four clay pots put inside wooden charcoal, and then put in a furnace, which furnace needs to have special openings for putting things inside, and also for carefully calculated fumes exhaust, some sort of opening. Inside the four clay pots would be the ore and various additional components, substances, that would actually make it melt at much lower temperature. One interesting thing is that the ancients started working directly with copper ores. They avoided more pure copper because it actually has a much higher melting temperature. Already the fact that somehow they knew that metal ore and which variety of metal ore, or which various combinations of various types of copper ore when combined would have a much lower melting threshold. This knowledge itself doesn't fit in this theory that it was a gradual experimenting process. Some other substances that were put inside the clay pots. On this picture there are four of them. It could be only one or much more or fewer. It doesn't matter. It is just a very general sketch. But some of the substances inside, besides the ore, would be for example, derived from animal bones. And the full picture just doesn't seem likely that somebody would decide to build such an installation, fill it up with charcoal for unknown reason, and then put stones inside and bones even. I mean, to reach experimentally all of a sudden to this ready-made installation seems unlikely. And if you still feel that this is quite easy and could be reached by experimental way, by trial and error, please take into consideration that you need a very precise temperature control during the full process. Not only you must reach the optimal temperature, but you must take a very good care that you do not go also above it much, because then the metals will become oxides, and that will be useless. They will be useless for metal work. Then you will need to invent yet another process to turn them into usable method again. Usable metal again. So by if they didn't know already which temperature to target exactly, and beforehand, by trial and error, they would just pass through this temperature easily, and they wouldn't know that they needed on this certain to keep it on this certain level for certain period of time to get the desired result. Please also keep in mind that it would be extremely odd experiment to fancy such an installation if you don't know the result already, because wooden charcoal also needed to be manufactured beforehand, especially for this metallurgy work. And by the way, if you don't know, the profession of the people who manufacture charcoal, even till nowadays, is listed as one of the most dangerous due to the highest relative percentage of people who actually even die during the process, because it is not as simple indeed to manufacture wood charcoal. Of course, nowadays we have safety measures and safety regulations. However, in the past, when they did not exist, many people died during the manufacture of wooden charcoal, because one needs to walk on this pits full of this charcoal, and many people would simply fall inside and die. So in other words, wooden charcoal is not something extremely common that lays around, and it is extremely unlikely that one would casually decide to put it in a pot in a fire and then discover the miracles of metallurgy. Also, let's imagine for a second that it was really like this, like it is in textbooks. They were throwing all kinds of things in the fire and experimented with whatever lays around, what will happen if we put it in the fire. But why didn't they try using the ordinary charcoal, which is readily available around? It also burns. It has very similar properties, but there are no findings of any experiments ever being made with ordinary, easily available charcoal. From the very beginning, they would use the only charcoal that is actually suitable for the process and that will really do the work. And this is wooden charcoal, which needed a lot of extra endeavor to be manufactured beforehand. This and many other details make the theory of the gradual trial and error process extremely questionable for the history of metallurgy. Another very interesting question is, since in reality metallurgy started directly with using metal ores, there are no archaeological findings suggesting anything before that. So since they started with the ores directly, how did they know which ore to use exactly? I mean, the stones that contain the ores, they look nothing like the metal that would be eventually produced after the process. And the variety of ores on our planet is enormous. Till nowadays, they continue discovering a new ore maybe every day or every week new ore is being registered. So how would the ancients already start exactly with the ore they need, and how would they know how to precisely separate it from its many similar cousins, so to say? And even more, how would they start exactly with combinations of ore that would directly give the most uh, durable and um, useful metal alloy? This doesn't seem at all like a trial and error process. Also, since the very beginning, various additional components were added to the ore inside those clay pots. And know how did they start from the very beginning with alloy of copper that already had the strongest properties? um, I mean, how would they know the resulting effect that would these additions, usually made of bones, make to those stones? It somehow doesn't seem logical that they experimented exactly from the first time with the full construction of already engineering project of a full furnace and a very precise recipe of various things to put inside, and then heat them to precise temperature and keep that level for a precise time. It doesn't look like an experiment or a trial and error or something that could happen by chance. Moreover, the duration of the process of extracting metal alloys from those ores requires very precise timings. If one heats them too little, it won't be ready. But if you overdo it, then everything gets spoiled as well. So actually, it is only in this regard that in very few locations there were findings that indicated that sometimes they took out the metal slightly too late. So there are a couple of examples of failures during attempts to extract metal from ores. Uh, However, these are very few and very isolated cases. They could be expected even from people who already knew the process. However, it failed um, for unknown reason. It can always happen. But even those failures, they're so few that they do not indicate of some trial and error process that would enable them to learn how long exactly to keep the um, ingredients in the furnace at a given temperature. And indeed, their small number proves that we are talking about people who already had a given recipe that they knew from the very beginning, and they were following very precisely. They were aware that they have to follow it precisely to get the desired result. Now next comes another factor. Not only you need to extract the metal, but one needs a very good and precise knowledge of the way and correct timing of cooling it. Various types of cooling would give different properties to the metal later on. We see no traces of experimenting with various cooling techniques. From the very beginning, we see only one recipe for the strongest alloy and most usable even nowadays, copper alloy. And we don't see any other variations in the beginning. We don't see that they reach to these conclusions to this conclusion after using lower grades of the metal. No, we see consistently only the best alloy from the very beginning. So here I listed most of the factors that an ancient metallurgist would need to know to have a successful extraction of metal from the ores. Um, if you think about it, just the variety of ores and strange looking stones and their combination is so unlimited, um, and that gives such a big variety of possible experiments, but we don't see any remains of any experiments at all. Only, as I mentioned, a couple of them with improper timing, which could happen maybe due to weather conditions, or maybe the person had an urgent work to do and abandoned the process. Something like this could have happened. It doesn't necessarily mean experiment. So the variety of ores, the shape of the oven, placing pots inside, various additional ingredients, um, reaching given temperature, keeping that temperature for a given period, then the cooling techniques. I mean, how much an experience would need a particular person in the antiquity to have? I mean, for how many generations they would need to experiment with the different ores, and how could they even experiment if they didn't know the other factors as well? So the conclusion is that we cannot talk of any of reaching this knowledge all of a sudden with the matter of 2 or 3 experiments done by somebody. And there must have been many thousands of such experiments if this knowledge was obtained by the method of trial and error. And since there is no record of finding traces of such experiments for the bronze, which was the first one to be worked on, we can definitely say that it is unlikely that they get the bronze working recipe as a result of experiments. Please note that until now I'm talking only about the bronze technology, which was the first one to appear in all regions of the world during the known history except North America. Over there, as we said, they started with the pure copper. However, in all other regions it was bronze. They started with bronze straight away. Moreover, when we talk about metal alloys, most of us would get the picture that one would first get some copper extracted and then some other metal and then mix them together in a certain proportions. However, this is not the optimal way to get the desired result with least possible work. The most easiest way, especially using primitive technology, is to mix the ores in their crude state already from the very beginning. Then it's much easier to get the desired alloy. And not only this is the easiest way, but this is the way they did it since the very beginning. There are no traces of the metals being prepared separately and then they experimented with certain proportion. No, from the very beginning they knew how much of this rock to put and then how much of that particular rock. And they started from straight away from the very beginning with the best blend of bronze. Many of the artifacts found in Europe, Asia and the Middle East, which looked kind of copper-like color, were labeled by the archaeologists as made of copper without performing any scientific tests on them, and the only basis to claim that was their looks. However, during the last 50 years, new scientific research showed that actually uh, pure copper items are extremely rare. Um, and from the very beginning, the so-called copper was actually bronze. The threshold between bronze and copper is 0.5% of arsenic. Of course, bronze is usually considered as alloy of copper and lead. However, the ancients were not using so much copper in combination with lead. They were using copper in combination of arsenic, in combination with arsenic, which has almost the same qualities. But even nowadays, this is a very modern development in technology. Modern technology turn to this um, combination copper plus arsenic because of its wonderful qualities, and uses various uses that cannot be accomplished by any other cheap alloy nowadays. So how come the ancients started straight away with this very modern alloy? Who told them about it? How would they figure out to add 0.5% of or at least 0.5% of this highly poisonous ingredient to the copper? It wouldn't make sense to make such experiments. And I'm saying 0.5% because this is the threshold of distinguishing between copper and bronze established by the latest scientific research. If the copper contains less than 0.5%, then it is considered, if the metal contains less than 0.5% arsenic, then it is considered as copper, and any other mixtures would be naturally occurring. However, if the arsenic is more than 0.5%, then that would be counted as alloy of copper. That means bronze. So in reality, from the very beginning of metallurgy in Europe, Asia, and Middle East, we have items made of this bronze, the first bronze, and starting straight away with such high-tech alloy wouldn't be possible unless numerous experiments, remains of various experiments were found. Due to the absolute absence of such experiments anywhere found, Andrey Sklyarov is suggesting to have a look at the history of metallurgy that the ancient people are telling themselves, because we should not forget that the so-called myth and legends are not a pure fantasy, but they are the conception of the tribes of their history. They do not call it myths, they call it history. And amazingly enough, all over the world, without any exceptions, everybody claims, I mean, how would be that possible if it was all fantasy? How come all ancient nations tell us that it was the gods who told them how to work with the metals? It is the gods who gave them the recipe of bronze. If it is really advanced beings from outside our culture, at least outside that historic moment, gave us the knowledge of how to manufacture bronze for the first time, then that would explain very well the archaeological findings, and also it would explain why metallurgy appeared on various places on our globe exactly at the same time, although those places, those cultures, were supposedly not connected to each other in any way. So how come they got the same knowledge, same recipe, same ingredients, same type of furnaces at the same time, uh, and were manufacturing uh, metals and alloys in the same fashion if there wasn't something common between them? Here I'm skipping a large portion of the original lecture where Andrey Sklyarov shows example of ancient metallurgy settlements from all around the globe and proves how they started basically more or less at the same time and more or less with the same recipe and technology, manufacturing the very same thing all over the world. Some interesting points from all those examples that are too voluminous to include in this video are, for example, sometimes furnace or metallurgy manufacturing would be literally built on area full of charcoal, not wooden charcoal. Practically almost the floor of where the metallurgy work was done was made of this charcoal, and yet there isn't even one example where attempt has been made to substitute the wooden charcoal with the ordinary charcoal, which is much easier to obtain, but it wouldn't, the full process wouldn't work with it. The fact that only wooden charcoal was used, again I'm reminding, is established by the waste dump that is located next to the metallurgy settlements. And another fact that makes us think is that in a number of these locations all around the world, seemingly unconnected, and all manufacturing alloy of copper and arsenic at the same time, all claiming that this has been taught to them by superior beings who visited the earth. In some cases, actually, the ores would not be found locally, and they would transport them from dozens of miles away, or sometimes from locations that were 100 kilometers away, just to keep the right recipe. This once again shows that we are not talking of some random trial and error process that a primitive person decided to do by throwing things in the fire. He was even importing things from faraway lands just to keep the recipe as it is. In some cases, the bronze was made not only of copper and arsenic, but also some nickel was found inside. This is the case with the keystone cuts, for example, in Pumapungum. And it's very interesting how did they get this nickel over there, since the nearest location where we know of nickel available is some 2,000-3,000 kilometers away in Brazil. And is it not interesting that in Turkey, where we have a very similar polygonal masonry that looks the same like the masonry found in Pumapungum, and in the same region, again in Turkey, we find bronze with similar content. with nickel mixed inside. And by the way, and the very fact that people would import ores from far, far away lands would really hint on the fact that they already had the recipe and they already knew what are they doing well. They were not experimenting, they were not bringing ores from thousands of kilometers, because then the variety would be so much. I mean, like in Sumer, they have some texts that tell us that they were bringing nickel all the way from Saudi Arabia to use in their metallurgy. Well, in case the gods or um, some sort of higher being taught us, the humans, how to work with bronze, how to obtain bronze, why would they do so? What would be the reason? Some people suggest that actually these beings were actively mining on our planet. Mining means making the humans mine for them, and they just collect the results, basically using us as slaves. And maybe this could be true. For example, the Incas, they had lots of gold. However, they were not using it in their everyday life. It was only for the gods. It is hard to verify nowadays how much this hypothesis about the gold exports from Earth to outer space is true. However, Andrey Sklyarov also adds another aspect to this hypothesis, that it is quite possible that the gods, so-called gods, or the higher beings, were interested not only in gold but also in bronze. Since hundreds of thousands of tons of bronze has been manufactured in very ancient time, thousands of years ago, we can get some idea about the quantity mined by the remains in the ancient mines. Although the quantity is very general, it is still absolutely huge. It is enormous. And the question comes into mind, where is this metal now? There should have been much more metal artifacts uh, found in the ancient settlements. However, they are relatively few. A larger portion of this bronze is actually missing. So the conclusion of Andrey Sklyarov is that it is possible that actually this bronze was taken off planet by the so-called gods for their needs, and then it would all make sense. They would basically teach their slaves how to manufacture bronze in primitive conditions, and then take it away. And later on, as the history of metallurgy develops, people, they actually later on take to iron. They start producing iron instead of copper, and I mean copper alloys. That means bronze. Andrey Sklyarov thinks that actually they switched to iron simply because they ran out of copper. It was all taken away. And the history of iron metallurgy is quite different from the history of bronze metallurgy. Over there, we clearly see remains of unsuccessful trials. Over there, people really experimented with iron. There is no given recipe that comes to Earth in the same way to different places. No, gradually people, for some reason, he thinks it is because they run out of copper, they started looking for alternatives and started applying what they knew about bronze and metallurgy to other metals that they could find around. We are usually told that people switched from bronze to iron because iron is harder. However, it's not exactly like this in all cases. First of all, not usually, but always people used ancients, they use alloys of copper, which were much better than the pure metal. And second of all, look at this artifact now. This is an ancient bronze statue dated very roughly some 3 to 5,000 years old. And when the scientists wanted to take just a very minute sample to find out the exact composition of the bronze, they actually broke a couple of instruments during the process of trying to extract the sample. So after they broke few tools, they actually had to call specialists all the way from Japan who would do a distant testing. And eventually it came out that this is bronze, however, it is so hard because it has aged. Aged bronze can be much harder than um, iron or many other materials. So don't, Andrey Sklyarov says, don't be so sure that they didn't know how to age it also artificially and make it so hard without having to wait ages that this happens naturally. Maybe I should clarify something. When I said they run out of copper to make bronze, what I meant is the sources that were easily mined went over. Even nowadays people mine copper, however they don't do it with primitive equipment. So what I meant is they run out of easily obtainable copper. And maybe the last point is to avoid misunderstandings about who are those gods. What does it mean the gods gave the knowledge of metallurgy to people? Gods doesn't necessarily mean some Anunnakis from another planet. God just means superior beings. When primitive folks, primitive tribes see beings that are magically more advanced than them, then they fall in the category of God. So they could be even humans. For example, they could be survivors from Atlantis or other highly developed civilization. They could be also survivors of some of the advanced civilizations whose remains and archaeological findings, I mean stone mansions, I have reviewed in some other videos in this playlist of my YouTube channel. So please do not get confused. I'm not saying that the hypothesis is exactly about Anunnakis. This has been, I think they are just unnecessarily stressed upon nowadays. And in many cases, I think instead of Anunnakis, people would be more correct if they replace this name with advanced beings. Because not all advanced beings who visited the earth were Anunnakis. And now at this point of the lecture, Andrey Sklyarov returns again on the subject of knowledge of iron metallurgy. And he says that at this stage, the most likely, the most acceptable and logical hypothesis seems that people actually did experiment and find out themselves how to work with iron. Still, he says this could very easily change in the very near future, because ancient metallurgy is actually a very, very recent topic that started somehow developing in the last 50 years. Before that, it was almost only pure theory. Just somebody decided history has to be taught in that way, and they wrote it, and then every textbook was basically a copy of another one without any really on-field research. And this started changing very recently. Metallurgy specialists have entered this area of study by giving advice just in the last 10 or 20 years. So we are really new to actually researching the history of metallurgy. Still very few scientists really work in this area, and yeah, actually we know very little, and things can change very fast. And it won't be surprising at all to find out that even the history of ironwork was aided by uh, God hands again. I mean, knowledge was again given by some external sources, because even at this point there are a couple of unsolved questions. There are a couple of technologies that could not have been discovered by the regular error and try method. So basically this is a new and very exciting branch of ancient history, metallurgy. Also the fact that the bronze or iron knowledge appeared a couple of thousand years ago all of a sudden in a few areas of the world, it doesn't mean it's the first time it is practiced on Earth. It is absolutely possible that in this period the knowledge was revived. Probably it was already far more developed in the ancient civilizations that disappeared. We tend to call them Atlantis or Lemuria or Lumeria. However, there are hypotheses which I believe find to be much more trustworthy, which say that behind each of these names there are a couple of civilizations that actually hide. That's why some people say Atlantis was off the coast of Morocco, others find traces on Malta. This could be either different branches of the same civilization or completely different civilizations. It's not that there is no rule that says there was only one advanced ancient civilization. I mean, with artifacts of human activity dating as far as a few hundred millions of years ago, obviously we can see that there is plenty of time for the development and demise of a good number of civilizations. So when we are talking about the history of metallurgy, most likely we are just touching only a very recent chapters of metallurgy, and it is a knowledge that it got revived. It is most likely not a knowledge that appeared for the first time. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have learned something. If you found this video interesting, you can visit my YouTube channel, and there is a full playlist with interesting things about our ancient history.